There are moments in music history that never made it into the official record. Moments that happened in rooms too private for cameras, in conversations too charged for journalists, in silences too heavy for radio. What happened between Frank Sinatra and Nina Simone in the winter of 1963 was exactly that kind of moment. It was not documented in mainstream newspapers. It was not celebrated on television. But everyone who was present in that room that evening carried it with them for the rest of their lives, because they had witnessed something rarer than any award ceremony or sold-out concert. They had watched one of the most powerful men in American entertainment dismiss a woman whose music would outlast everything he thought he understood about art. And then they watched her answer him, not with words, with music. Frank Sinatra in 1963 was not simply a famous singer, he was an institution. He was the architecture of American cool, the living definition of what it meant to move through the world with authority and ease. His voice had seduced an entire generation into believing that life could be beautiful even when it was hard, that romance was real even when it was borrowed, that a man in a good suit with the right phrasing could make the whole room lean toward him. He had survived the years when his career collapsed. He had come back stronger, more powerful, more untouchable. He had earned his arrogance the hard way, and by 1963 he wore it like a second skin. Nina Simone in 1963 was something the music industry had not quite prepared itself for. She had already released recordings that made critics reach for words they did not normally use when reviewing black women who played piano in jazz clubs. Her voice was not smooth. It was not designed to comfort. It sat low and heavy in the chest, and when it rose, it did not soar the way audiences had been trained to expect. It demanded, it accused, it grieved without apologizing for the grief. She had trained as a classical pianist. She had wanted, since childhood, to be the first great black classical concert pianist in America. That door had been closed to her not because of her talent, which was beyond question, but because of who she was in a country that had very specific ideas about who was allowed to stand at the center of its culture. So Nina Simone had taken everything she learned at the piano bench, every hour of Chopin and Bach and Beethoven that she had absorbed until it lived in her hands, and she had brought it into jazz clubs and folk stages and recording studios, and she had made something the world had no category for. By 1963, she had also begun to do something that made a particular kind of person very uncomfortable. She had started making music that was not designed to entertain. She had started making music that was designed to tell the truth. The gathering that winter evening was the kind of event that existed in the overlap between the entertainment world and the social world of mid-century America, a dinner held at a private residence in Los Angeles, attended by musicians, producers, a few actors, a few people whose money moved quietly through the industry. The guest list was the kind that made publicists nervous and everyone else feel important. Nina had been invited because of her growing reputation, because the people hosting that evening understood, even if they could not quite articulate it, that she represented something significant happening in American music. Frank Sinatra was there because Frank Sinatra was always there. He was the room. He defined the room by being in it. For the first part of the evening, they existed in the same space without collision. This was not unusual. Large gatherings of famous people operate on a kind of careful choreography, everyone aware of the other's presence, everyone maintaining enough distance that the tensions remain social rather than personal. Nina moved through the evening with the particular dignity she carried everywhere, the quality that people who did not understand her sometimes mistook for coldness, which was in fact simply the bearing of a woman who had decided very early that she would not shrink herself to make others comfortable. It was late in the evening when Frank Sinatra said what he said. The room had loosened the way rooms do after several hours, after enough drinks and enough music drifting from a record player in the corner. He was speaking to a small group that included a record producer Nina recognized and two men whose names she did not know. He was not speaking to her. He was speaking about her, or more precisely, he was speaking about the kind of music she made, in the way that powerful men sometimes speak about things they find irritating, confident that no one in earshot will contradict them. The words, according to those who were present, were something close to this. He said that he did not understand why some performers felt the need to bring politics into music. He said that people came to hear singing, not lectures. He said that music was meant to give people relief, not load them down with more trouble than they already carried. He said, and this was the phrase that the people in that room remembered most clearly, that angry music was not real music. It was noise with a cause attached to it. He was not looking at Nina Simone when he said this. He did not need to. Everyone in the room understood who he was talking about. Nina Simone heard every word. What happened in the next few seconds was described differently by the different people who witnessed it. Some said she went very still. Some said she turned slowly. Some said there was a change in the quality of the silence around her, the way the air in a room changes just before a storm makes itself known. What they all agreed on was that she did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She did not reach for any of the weapons that the moment might have invited. She walked to the piano. There was a piano in the room. as there often was in the homes of people who moved in those circles. A beautiful instrument that had been played earlier in the evening by someone doing exactly the kind of music Frank Sinatra had just described approvingly, smooth and warm and designed to make the room feel good about itself. Nina sat down at that piano with the ease of someone returning to a place they have never really left. She adjusted the bench. She placed her hands on the keys. And she looked up once across the room, not at Frank Sinatra but at the room itself, as if she were deciding something. Then she began to play. What she played in those first minutes was not political. It was not angry, at least not in any way that the word usually means. It was Chopin. A nocturne, the kind of piece that exists at the very edge of what written music can contain, that lives in the space between notes, that requires from the performer not just technical mastery but a willingness to sit inside sorrow without flinching. Her hands moved across the keys with the authority of someone who had spent thousands of hours in conversation with this music, who understood it not as a performance but as a language. The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something unexpected happens, when the social calculations that govern every gathering suddenly become irrelevant because something real has entered the space. Frank Sinatra was listening. He could not help it. Whatever he had expected, it was not this. Then something shifted. The Chopin dissolved, not abruptly but naturally, the way one season becomes another. And what came next was still Nina at the piano, but Nina moving somewhere else entirely. The classical structure remained, the discipline, the precision, but beneath it something opened up, something that had roots in the gospel music she had heard as a very small child in a church in Tryon, North Carolina, something that reached back through jazz and blues to the oldest forms of musical expression that Black Americans had developed as a way of surviving what could not otherwise be survived. The two things, the European classical tradition and this older, deeper American inheritance, moved through her hands at the same time, and the room began to understand that it was hearing something that could not be separated into its parts, that the woman at the piano had spent her entire life learning how to hold all of it simultaneously. And then she began to sing. She did not announce a song. She did not introduce what she was doing. She simply let her voice enter the room alongside her hands. And what she sang was about America, not the America of romance and cocktails and summer nights, not the America that had made Frank Sinatra the symbol of a particular kind of effortless belonging. She sang about the other America, the one that existed alongside that first one, that had always existed alongside it, the America where the violence was not metaphorical, where the beauty was purchased at a price that only some people were asked to pay. She did not shout. She did not rage. Her voice was measured and controlled, and that control made it more devastating, not less, because control under those circumstances is a kind of courage, and courage makes people feel things they would prefer not to feel. The room was not comfortable. That was the point. The room was being asked to hold two things at once, the extraordinary beauty of what Nina Simone was doing at that piano, and the knowledge of what that beauty was about, what it was carrying, what it was saying about the country they all lived in and the different ways they were permitted to live in it. Frank Sinatra did not speak. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough to mean something. And then there was applause, the kind that happens when people are releasing something they have been holding without realizing it. Several people in the room were crying, which surprised them. One of the producers who had been standing near Sinatra when he made his remarks about angry music walked across the room toward the piano and said something to Nina that no one else could hear, and she nodded once, and that was enough. Frank Sinatra left the gathering shortly after. Those who knew him said later that he was uncharacteristically quiet on the drive home. Whether that quiet reflected something changing in him, or simply the discomfort of a man who had been answered more completely than he expected, no one who knew him well was entirely willing to say. What was noted by those who paid attention to such things was that in the years following that evening, Sinatra's public comments about the relationship between music and social life became somewhat more careful, somewhat less dismissive. Whether that had anything to do with a winter evening in Los Angeles at a piano, there is no way to know with certainty. Nina Simone never discussed the evening in any interview that became part of the public record. She was not someone who needed to claim victories. She had said what she needed to say, and she had said it in the only language she fully trusted, the language she had been building since she was a small girl with her feet barely reaching the pedals, practicing in the house of a woman named Muriel Mazinovich, who saw something in her that the rest of the world would spend decades learning to see. What that evening revealed was something that Nina Simone's entire career had been built on making visible. The argument that music should not carry weight, should not be burdened with the reality of the world, is not actually a neutral argument. It is itself a political position. It is the position of someone for whom the world as it exists is comfortable enough that relief from it is a luxury they can afford. The music that Frank Sinatra made, the music that put rooms at ease and made life feel graceful and possible, was not a political. It was the sound of a particular kind of American belonging, available to some and not to others, and the ease of it, the beautiful, effortless ease of it, required a certain silence about what it cost to maintain that ease. Nina Simone's music refused that silence. That was not a failure of entertainment. That was the deepest form of artistic honesty, the decision to use the full power of what she knew, everything the piano had taught her and everything America had taught her, to make sound out of what the world preferred to leave unspoken. She had been told as a young woman that the concert halls were not for her. She had been told that certain rooms were not her rooms, that certain futures were not available to the person she was. She had taken all of that information and she had turned it into music that outlasted every room that had ever tried to close its doors to her. There is a recording of Nina Simone playing Chopin that was made in the late 1960s, not from a concert but from what appears to be a private session, informal, the piano slightly out of tune in one register. When you listen to it, you can hear what the people in that Los Angeles room heard, the absolute command, the refusal to separate technical mastery from emotional truth, the sense that the music is not being performed but inhabited. And beneath the Chopin, if you listen the way you have to learn to listen to Nina Simone, you can hear everything else she carried. The church in Tryon, the audition she was not given, the years of practice in borrowed rooms, the America she loved and the America that wounded her, the anger she refused to hide and the grace she never lost. Frank Sinatra was wrong that evening. Not maliciously, perhaps, not with the full understanding of what he was dismissing, but he was wrong in the way that people are wrong when they have been told for long enough that their comfort is the natural condition of the world. That music which disturbs that comfort is less than music that maintains it. Nina Simone sat down at his piano and took 4 minutes to explain the error. She did not need a single word to do it. Real music, it turns out, does not ask your permission to matter. It does not soften itself to suit the room. It finds the place in you that you have been protecting most carefully, and it opens it, and it fills it with whatever truth it has been asked to carry. That is what Nina Simone knew. That is what she had always known. And that winter evening, in a room full of people who thought they understood what music was for, she reminded everyone present that they had only ever been hearing part of it. The piano keys did not remember Frank Sinatra's skepticism when she pressed them. They only remembered her hands.